Hello, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Thank you for taking a few moments to listen in today. Over the last few weeks, we've had the wonderful opportunity to have brought on guests onto the podcast, and hopefully you were able to learn something, to be able to practically take something from those particular interviews and apply them into your business. In a couple weeks, we'll have another interview or two that I think also will provide some help to you and to your business as you move into 2022. What I'd like to do today is I'm going to give you a list of 21 items that I think are going to be helpful for you as you begin to transition, wrap up 2021, and enter into 2022. Some of these are going to be pure compliance related. Others will be a list that, if you're a solopreneur, maybe items that you're going to have to do or hand off to your finance team to be able to make sure that these particular items are done. I think this will be helpful. It's going to be, I think, overly practical, if anything. Some of these items, I think all of these items, I think for most businesses, you're going to need to make sure that they're all completed before you really finish the end of January. Some of these are items you'll want to make sure you get taken care of before this week ends, the last week of 2021. So 21 year-end task for 2021. And of course, I think this list can be applied to any year. But as we wrap up this particular year, trying to give you some practical help as you wrap up this year. First of all, review your licensing requirements. So if you're in a business that requires a license, I know, of course, as an accountant, there are various licenses that we have to have in order to be compliant both at the state and the federal end, and we want to make sure that those are up to date. Not just your licensing requirement as it relates to work, but also your licensing requirements for the business. Most towns, municipalities, cities have an annual license requirement. Make sure that license requirement, you've sent out the application, you paid for it. That way you have an effective license or an active license going into 2022. This can also be true at the state end as it relates to the sales tax. So if you have in Indiana, where we're housed here, they have what they call a retail merchant certificate. It's called different things in different states, but basically allows for you to be able to either sell goods, sell services. Maybe if you're in a business that has some sort of a specialty. If you're in the restaurant industry, for example, there may be other licenses that you're required to have. So make sure that those are up to date and they're ready for 2022. Next, make sure your annual reports are filed with your Secretary of State or your Department of State's office. So most states, all states that I know of, have either an annual or a biannual requirement to go through and a report that gets filed either every year or every other year to keep your entity active with the state. So make sure that those reports have been filed. So most states have a search tool. You can go online into the Secretary of State's office, search your business, make sure that report is up to date. If not, most states you can go in, file it yourself. If not, reach out to your attorney or your accountant and make sure that those reports have been filed. Next, number 3, and where this is extremely important, you're going to find this to be extremely important, is if you're dealing with either an audit scenario or a lawsuit. And that is to make sure that you hold your annual meeting. So if you happen to be a corporation, you need to have an annual meeting. Most of the time, that's re-electing your officers. Now you may say, Josh, I'm a single member. I'm a sole owner, sole shareholder corporation. Still, you need to have an annual. You still have an annual meeting where you essentially re-elect yourself to your position. So if you're the president and secretary of your company, you need to have meeting minutes that state such. Make sure that's done before the end of the year. If you happen to be an LLC, you'll want to have an annual membership meeting. You want to make sure you're following your bylaws if you're a corporation, following your operating agreement if you are an LLC. And please, I want to point this out. If you have an entity, I know a lot of people, they kind of just go on and they can pull an EIN, they can pull articles of organization, and they say, okay, I'm an LLC, and they go and begin operating. Please make sure you have an operating agreement in place. This is going to dictate how your business is to operate. If you end up getting sued, they're going to ask for these things. They're going to ask for your operating agreement, and they're going to ask for your annual minutes. If you don't have these, it's going to be a way to kind of pierce through the veil of your entity and get to you personally. So make sure that you have these in order. I would strongly suggest, probably for most businesses, that they work with their attorney and their accountant to make sure that these particular documents are compliant. These are state compliant documents as well. So make sure that whatever you have in those agreements are compliant with your state. I understand you can go on to these websites and they'll give you kind of a boilerplate agreement. The problem is that sometimes these agreements are not compliant with the laws of the state that you are in. So make sure that you have those annual reports filed. Make sure that you have your annual meetings and that those meetings are compliant and aligned with your operating agreement or your bylaws. So if you're a member of your organization, you're going to have that annual meeting. A lot of times it's maybe helpful to have this in conjunction maybe with a year-end budget meeting. Where you sit down and review a budget. Whatever that looks like for you, just make sure that you have that annual meeting to where you're retaining or replacing officers or members or managers within your business. Next, number 4, conduct an inventory count as of December 31st. So assuming that you are an annual calendar year taxpayer. If you're not, you'd be doing this at a different point of the year. This should be something you're doing every month anyway, but especially as year end, most businesses and individuals are calendar year. So I would strongly suggest that as of December 31st, you have a physical inventory count. So make sure you have that inventory number. Now, this is not your number as to what you would sell it for, but your number as far as what you actually purchased it for. So you actually go through and you do a physical inventory count. This is what I have on my shelves, and then make sure that you have that you have those numbers and you're ready to turn those over to your accountant. That way, you're able to, number one, do your sales tax reconciliation, make sure that that's all properly filed for the year, as well as to make sure you have that ending inventory number for your tax return. Number 5, review large purchases for capitalization requirements. What I'm talking about here is essentially for depreciation. Okay, and also review your fixed assets. So as you kind of work through, and your personal property. So go around your property, how many computers do you still have there on site, your desk, etc. Some of the items you may have disposed of during the year, you'll want to know that information. So make sure you're going through, you kind of do that physical count of both your personal property and also your real property. And also to see if there's anything in your books that needs to be depreciated. So if you have larger asset purchases. Now, you can have company policies that state everything under a certain threshold as it relates to personal property you can directly expense. But that does need to be a company policy. There is kind of a little bit of a safe harbor there. But if you have larger items, you bought a file server, for example, for the office, to make sure that's just not stuck in as office equipment, but to make sure that that's being properly depreciated and is properly represented on your balance sheet. And then also any sort of assets that you may have disposed of in your business, any sort of personal property, desks that you may have thrown out, computers that no longer work, etc., that you have that count and know exactly this is what we have on property. Not only is this helpful for taxes, but also for insurance purposes as well. Next, number 6, review your aged accounts receivable for bad debt or for collection. So as you kind of go through, review your receivables. Now, I do this with my team every month. Okay, but we are heavily focused on our receivables. But in your business, if you have receivables, make sure you're sitting down at year end. Are any of these items? Do we want to write these off? These are not going to be collectible. We're going to go ahead and write these off, or do I need to turn these over to my attorney for collection efforts? But make sure you have that done for December 31st or at the end of the year. Number 7, review accounts payable for any possible adjustments. So sometimes you go through, you're booking your payables, either items may have gotten missed that you didn't pay. You want to make sure those were paid by the end of the year to take advantage of the deduction if you happen to be cash basis versus accrual. Or maybe you just simply missed paying a vendor, or a situation to where maybe a vendor gave you a discount, items were returned, but you didn't adjust the payable. So make sure that you go through, you review your accounts payable as well. Next, number 8 here, review other current liabilities. And this would be primarily payroll and sales tax. Just this morning, we had our weekly team meeting, and I gave my team the direction to make sure that we have all of our payroll taxes paid by the end of the year. Want to make sure that's all flushed out of the books, but you want to make sure that reconciliation is done, that your payroll tax liability numbers are correct, your sales tax liability number is correct as of the end of the year. If you happen to be cash basis, it may be one of those situations to where you want to make sure that those are paid by the end of the year as well. Number 9, confirm your loan balances. So go through, look at the loans that you have on your books, make sure that those balances are correct. Your interest is booked correctly, and those balance sheet numbers are also correct. Number 10, review personal versus business nature of transactions. So you may want to take some time, go through your books. Did you book some travel that was business that actually should be personal? Did you buy some items and you bought some items over the holidays on your Amazon card, your business pays your Amazon card, and you wrote those off as an office expense? You really need to kind of go through, review the books, review your purchases, make sure the books are correct as it relates to business transactions versus any items that really should have been personal, and those need to be flushed out and taken off of the P&L. Number 11, review and properly books any funds received through grants or federal or state relief. And especially this would be related to any sort of PPP loans that you may have received, any sort of other type of help that you may have received. PPP loans, if they were forgiven, you'll want to make sure that those are booked as other revenue, as other non-taxable revenue, and they don't get they're not just hanging out there on the balance sheet as a loan that still need to be paid, but to make sure that that has been taken care of. If you received an idle advance and that idle advance was forgiven, okay, you'll want to make sure also that that is booked as other revenue and you don't leave that as a liability on your books. You may have received other federal or state grants that are not taxable. Those types of things, you want to make sure that those have all been booked correctly. Number 12, reconcile all bank and credit card accounts. Now, of course, this will be something that'll be done at the beginning of the year. Now, unfortunately, we run into a lot of situations to where clients don't ever reconcile their books. So they're trying to do their own bookkeeping, or they're using a bookkeeping service, and they're not going through and reconciling out those bank accounts and credit card accounts every month. That is something that does need to be done before you get into the process of issuing 1099 to your vendors, to your lenders, and then also W-2s, as well as getting to the point of your tax returns completed. So you want to make sure all those bank accounts and credit card accounts are reconciled. I generally suggest that most business owners have that done by the 10th of every month. Okay, but if you've gone a time, you haven't done that, make sure that it's completed before you get to the point of getting those compliance documents out at the end of the year. So reconcile all bank and credit card accounts. This would also include lines of credit, etc. Number 13, reconcile prepaid accounts and accruals such as payroll. Now, this isn't necessarily for tax, but if you are in a situation to where you have gap-based financials especially, or if you're in a situation to where you're going to be sending your accrual-based financials to a bank, you want to make sure that you have your accruals booked. And so a lot of this was maybe payroll. So you need to book part of your payroll one way or the other to make sure that you're properly representing your payroll expense on the books for 2021. So go through all of your accruals, make sure that those are booked correctly. If you listen to this, you don't know what I'm talking about, it probably doesn't apply to you, okay? But if you're in a situation to where you understand what I'm talking about, you'll understand that is something you'll want to make sure you have finished as we wrap up the year and move into the first part of next year. Number 14, reconcile point of sale reports with revenue and deposits. So if you go through and you have a point of sale system, so if you're selling some sort of a product, and you go through and I'll use some somewhat antiquated terminology here, but kind of go through and you cash register. You compile those receipts, those reports. Make sure that those all reconcile together with your deposits. If you have a variance, why? Okay. Did you take cash out of the cash register to pay for items? Okay. Those types of things. Make sure that that's all reconciled out. So your point of sale reports have been reconciled to your deposits. Next, make sure all bonuses, retirement, or other employee benefit requirements are paid according to employee contracts or company policies. Okay, and this is something you want to make sure that's done by the end of the year. So if you're supposed to be have some sort of company matching and retirement accounts, employee benefits that should have been paid, make sure that bonuses according to whatever sort of employee contract that you have with your employees. Going back once again to contracts, we talked about agreements earlier as it relates to either bylaws or an operating agreement. It would strongly suggest that you have employee agreements as well, employee contracts in place. But make sure that whatever you're doing, make sure that those have all been met by the end of the year. Number 16, compare budget to actual and trending to identify any material variances or abnormalities. So you went through, hopefully your business has some sort of a budget, okay, but run through, sit down, look at your budget to your actual and see are there some material variances. Now, this is something realistically you probably should be doing on a monthly basis if not quarterly basis. Definitely doing this annually is not the best idea, but if you are doing this, and hopefully you are monthly or quarterly, you sit down as we approach the end of the year and see if there are some material variances. You want to do this for two reasons. Number one, to see if there have been some serious cost overruns in some areas. Okay, we are unfortunately in a year where inflation is really starting to take effect. That might be part of it. Okay, you may be over budget simply because things cost more. But then this is an element that you need to work into your pricing going forward. Do I need to increase my prices because I know that certain things are costing us more? Is it a situation to where you have employees in your business that you allow them the ability to go through and purchase items? Maybe they're not being prudent with the way with those responsibilities. This will help you provide you some of that insight as well. Or lastly, in a worst case scenario, it may be a situation to where maybe you have employees, unfortunately, that may be taking things from you, spending company funds inappropriately or even illegally. So if you're going through and you're looking at your budget to actual, this can help provide you insight into a few different areas into your business. And as we also approach the end of the year, I think a really good idea to begin, if you haven't already, to get your budget prepared for 2022. So compare your budget to actual and trending to identify any material variances or abnormalities. Number 17, reconcile any sort of paid time off policies that you have to make sure that your liabilities are there correctly. It's kind of going back to the accruals earlier. If you have a PTO policy, you want to make sure that you have those booked correctly as well on your books. Number 18, scan or file all receipts and supporting documents. A few years ago at the firm level, we went paperless. So if you come into our office, the only paper that you'll see on our desk are notes that we take or clients that happen to stop by and we didn't get those scanned in. But if you're in a company, you really should try to go through, get everything stored electronically if you can. If not, make sure you have all your receipts compiled, put into a box and put away. But ideally, get everything scanned in, get everything organized as we get ready for a new year. So scan or file all receipts and supporting documents. Number 19, generate backups of all important data and retain pursuant to your data retention policies. So in the years ago, in the business that I worked in, we used to have disk we used to take off site. Okay, this was part of our data retention policy. Now most everything kind of stored in the cloud. Make sure that you have your backups. You have good solid year-end backups. You may want to make a couple so you have in case one of them isn't good, you have one that is good. Make sure you have good solid year-end backups. And make sure that those are in place and you have that data stored securely. And maybe a good time also to review your data retention policy. Nowadays, data is essential. And so we even have an audit that has to be done every year at the firm level because we have client data, making sure that we're following all requirements. Do we have a data retention policy in place? What does that look like? And then making sure that we're following that data retention policy and how we're storing that data, how we're securing that data. And making sure that you have backups, make sure you're following any sort of data retention requirements that you would have on your business. Number 20, I mentioned this before, prepare your budget for this next year. Sit down. If you have a finance team in place, you have a controller, you have a CFO, sit down with them, review that budget, get that budget prepared, review that budget, make sure it's something that's going to work for your business going into 2022. If you're a solopreneur, you're operating on your own, get somebody alongside to help you. Maybe it's a spouse. Maybe it's a mentor, a coach, somebody that can sit down and review your budget with you and help you. Your accountant. I know we do this with some of our clients as well. We sit down, we look at their annual budget, compare to see what had happened before, identify what sort of goals they have in place for this next year, and then build the budget out accordingly. And then number 21, lastly, and I kind of mentioned this as we trickle through this, review all of your policies and procedures. This may be at the employee level, this may be at the vendor level. Make sure your policies and procedures have been updated, they're clean, they've been distributed, and they lastly, and most importantly, are definitely being followed as well. So 21 items, I think, as we wrap up the year 2021 that you may want to take note of. I'll go through and I'll put all of these 21 items into the show notes and just go through, and if it's something you want to kind of sit down with your team, make sure all these are being done as you wrap up this year and move into 2022. Hopefully this will be of some help. Once again, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Hope you have a wonderful New Year's holiday. Have a wonderful day.